Chapter 1. Since the death of his wife, a remarkable change had taken place in my friend Thomas. He had lost his former air of contentment and good nature, and had grown morose and sullen. Instead of being the most willing and industrious laborer in the field as he used to be, he seemed to have imbibed a strong distaste for work, and he slighted and neglected his task as much as possible. Had he been under any other driver than myself, his idleness and neglect would have frequently brought him into trouble. But I loved and pitied him, and I screened him all I could. The wrongs and injuries that had been inflicted upon him since his arrival at Lusahatchee seemed to have subverted all the principles upon which he had so long acted. It was a subject on which he did not seem inclined to converse, and upon which I was unwilling to press him. But I had abundant reason to suspect that he had totally renounced the religion in which he had been so carefully instructed, and which, for so long a time, had exercised so prayerful an influence over him. He had secretly returned to the practice of certain wild rites, which, in his early youth, he had learned from his mother, who had herself been kidnapped from the coast of Africa, and who had been, as he had often told me, zealously devoted to her country's superstitions. He would sometimes talk wildly and incoherently about having seen the spirit of his departed wife, and of some promise he had made to the apparition, and I was led to believe that he suffered under occasional fits of partial insanity. At all events, he was in most respects an altered man. He had ceased to be the humble and obedient slave, contented with his lot and zealously devoted to his master's service. Instead of promoting his master's interest, it seemed now to be his study and his aim to do as much mischief as possible. There were 2 or 3 artful, daring, unquiet spirits on the plantation, from whom till lately he had kept aloof, but whose acquaintance he now sought, and whose confidence he sought to obtain. They found him bold and prudent, and what was more, trusty and magnanimous, and they soon gave place to his superiority of intellect, and acknowledged him as their leader. They were joined by some others whose only motives was the desire of plunder, and they extended their depredations to every part of the plantation. In this new character Thomas still gave evidence that he was no ordinary man. He conducted his enterprises with singular address, and when all other stratagems by which to save his companions from detection proved unavailing, he had still one recourse that showed the native nobleness of his soul. Such was the steady firmness of his mind, and the masculine vigor of his constitution, that he was enabled to do what few men could. He could brave even the torture of the lash, a torture, I have said already, not less terrible than that of the rack itself. When every other recourse failed him, he was ready to shield his companions by a voluntary confession, and to concentrate upon himself a punishment which he knew that some among them were too feeble and faint-hearted to endure. Magnanimity such as this is esteemed even in a free man the highest pitch of virtue. How then shall we sufficiently admire it in a slave? Thank God, tyranny is not omnipotent. Though it crushes its victims to the earth, and treads them into the dust, and brutify them by every possible invention, it cannot totally extinguish the spirit of manhood within them. Here it glimmers, and there it secretly burns, sooner or later to burst forth in a flame that will not be quenched and cannot be kept under. So long as I was in the confidence of Mr. Martin, I was able to render Thomas essential service by informing him of the suspicions, plans, and stratagems of the overseer. It was not long, however, before I forfeited that confidence. Not because Mr. Martin entertained any suspicion of my playing him false, for it was very easy to throw dust in the eyes of so stupid a fellow, but because I did not come up to his notions of the spirit and the duty of a driver.